My name is Beatrice Winchester, and at 67 years old, I never imagined I would be standing here, humiliated in my own home by the very child I had sacrificed everything for. But perhaps I should start from the beginning, for this story is not just about a cake thrown in anger. It's about a lifetime of struggles, sacrifices, think the bitter harvest they sometimes yield. I was born in 1957 to a family that knew hardship intimately. My father, Harold, worked 3 jobs to keep food on our table, while my mother, Dorothy, took in washing and mending from the wealthier families in town. We lived in a cramped 2-room house on Elm Street, where the wallpaper peeled like autumn. Leaves and the floorboards creaked secrets to anyone who would listen. When I turned 18, I married my childhood sweetheart, Edmund Winchester. He was a good man with calloused hands and dreams bigger than his circumstances. We moved into a tiny apartment above Murphy's General Store, where the smell of pickles and old wood became the backdrop of our early married life. Edmund worked at the steel mill, coming home each evening covered in grime, but always with a smile for me. If you're finding this story compelling so far, please consider joining our community by hitting that subscribe button. Stories like Beatrice's deserve to be heard and shared. Our first years were filled with simple joys. We would sit on our small balcony in the evenings, sharing a single bottle of Coca-Cola and planning our future. Edmund would trace patterns on my palm and tell me about the house he would build for us. Someday, a real house with a garden where I could grow roses and a kitchen large enough for a proper dining table. When I became pregnant with Millicent. In 1986, our modest happiness felt complete. But pregnancy brought complications I had never anticipated. The doctor bills mounted like autumn leaves, and Edmund began working double shifts to cover the costs. I remember watching him leave before dawn and return after midnight, his shoulders growing more stooped with each passing week. Millicent arrived on a cold February morning, screaming her way into the world with the fierce determination that would define her character. She was beautiful, rosy-cheeked, with Edmund's green eyes and my stubborn chin. But motherhood was harder than I had imagined. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, the way every decision seemed to carry the weight of her entire future. When Millicent was 2, Edmund was injured at the mill. A piece of machinery malfunctioned, crushing his left hand and ending his career in heavy labor. The compensation barely covered his medical bills, and suddenly our small income became even smaller. I took a job at the local diner, working the early morning shift so I could be home when Millicent woke up. Those were the years that aged me beyond my time. I would rise at 4 in the morning, serve coffee and eggs to truckers and early commuters until noon. Then rush home to care for Millicent and tend to Edmund, who had fallen into a depression as dark as winter nights. His dreams of building us a house faded like old photographs, replaced by the bitter reality of disability checks and medical appointments. I learned to stretch every dollar until it screamed. Ground beef became a luxury reserved for special occasions. I mended Millicent's clothes until they were more patched than original fabric. I cut my own hair and wore the same 3 dresses in rotation, telling myself that appearances didn't matter as long as my family was fed and housed. But children notice everything, don't they? Millicent began asking why she couldn't have the toys her classmates had, why we never went on vacation like other families, why her lunch was always peanut butter sandwiches while other children brought elaborate meals. I would hold her close and promise that things would get better, that someday we would have everything we wanted. For those of you who understand the weight of such promises, please take a moment to become part of our family. Your subscription means the world to parents like Beatrice who struggled in silence. The turning point came when Millicent was 8. My elderly Aunt Gertrude passed away, leaving me her small house on Maple Street. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that had seen better decades, but it was ours. No more rent, no more living above the store with its constant noise, and smells. Asterisk moving into that house felt like stepping into a different life. For the first time, Millicent had her own room. I planted a small garden in the backyard, finally growing those roses Edmund had promised me years earlier. We painted the walls cheerful colors and hung curtains I had sewn myself from fabric remnants. Asterisk Edmund's spirits lifted slightly in the new house. He began tinkering with repairs and improvements, his damaged hand limiting but not stopping his desire to provide for us. We established routines, small traditions that made us feel like a real family instead of people just surviving from day to day. Asterisk, I continued working at the diner, eventually becoming the manager. The pay wasn't substantial, but it was steady, and I had learned to make steady money stretch to meet our needs. I saved every penny I could, dreaming of the day when I could afford to send Millicent to college, to give her opportunities I had never had. Asterisk Millicent grew into a bright but demanding child. She excelled in school but always wanted more. Clothes, more activities, more of everything. I worked overtime whenever possible, taking on catering jobs for local events, selling my homemade preserves at the farmer's market. Every extra dollar went toward making her life better. Asterisk, when she was in high school, Millicent announced she wanted to attend the state university. The tuition was more than I made in 6 months, but I had been saving faithfully. I had also been making improvements to the house, knowing that its value was our security. Our only real asset, asterisk Edmund, passed away suddenly when Millicent was 19 during her sophomore year of college. A heart attack took him on a Tuesday morning while he was working in the garden, surrounded by the roses he had helped me plant. I found him there among the blooms, peaceful but gone, leaving me truly alone for the first time in my adult life. Asterisk, the funeral costs consumed most of my savings. Millicent came home for a week, grieving in her own way, but eager to return to her studies and her new life. I understood college was her chance to escape the limitations that had defined our family for so long. Asterisk, after Edmund's death, the house felt enormous and empty. I rattled around in it like a dried bean in a pod, maintaining the garden and the improvements because they were tangible connections to better times. I continued working, though my arthritis made the long shifts increasingly difficult. Asterisk, Millicent graduated with honors and moved to the city, landing a good job with a marketing firm. She rented a modern apartment and began living the life I had always dreamed of giving her. She visited occasionally, usually when she needed money for a deposit, help with car payments, assistance during times when her own budget ran tight. Asterisk. I gave willingly, drawing from my modest savings and sometimes taking on extra work to help her establish herself. She was building the life we had always planned for her, and her success felt like validation of all our sacrifices. Asterisk, if Beatrice's dedication to her daughter resonates with you, please consider subscribing to hear more stories of parental love and sacrifice. Your support helps these important narratives reach those who need to hear them. Asterisk, as I entered my 60s, my health began declining more noticeably. The arthritis spread from my hands to my knees and back. The long shifts at the diner became increasingly painful, but I persevered, knowing that the house and my small savings were all I had for security in my golden years. Asterisk, Millicent's visits became less frequent but more demanding. She would arrive with complaints about her job, her apartment, her financial struggles. She began making comments about the house, how much it must be worth now, how impractical it was for an aging woman to maintain such a large property alone. Asterisk, at first, I thought she was concerned about my well-being. The house did require upkeep that was becoming difficult for me to manage. The roof needed repairs, the plumbing occasionally acted up, and the garden that had once brought me joy now felt like an overwhelming responsibility. Asterisk, but gradually, I realized that Millicent's concern was not primarily for my welfare. She began suggesting that I should simplify my life, move into a senior living facility, and let the house serve its purpose. When I asked what she meant by that, she became evasive, changing the subject or becoming irritated with what she called my stubbornness. Asterisk, the conversations grew more frequent and more pointed. Millicent would arrive with brochures for retirement communities, articles about the dangers of elderly people living alone, and increasingly aggressive suggestions that I should transfer ownership of the house to her for my own protection. Asterisk, I began to understand that in Millicent's mind, the house had already become hers. She spoke about it as though my continued residence there was temporary, a minor inconvenience that would soon be resolved. She made plans for renovations, discussed its potential rental income, and treated my attachment to it as sentimental foolishness. Asterisk, the tension between us grew with each visit. I tried to explain that the house was my security, my independence, the only thing standing between me and complete vulnerability in my old age. But Millicent seemed incapable of understanding why I would not simply hand over the deed to the property that represented everything I had worked for my entire adult life. Asterisk, last month, she arrived with legal documents already prepared. She had visited an attorney and had transfer papers drawn up. All I needed to do was sign, and the house would be hers. She presented this as a reasonable solution to a problem I didn't know I had. Asterisk, when I refused to sign. Her facade of filial concern cracked completely. She accused me of being selfish, of not trusting her, of clinging to material possessions instead of thinking about her future. She reminded me of every sacrifice she claimed to have made, every time she had visited or called when she would rather have been doing something else. Asterisk, you owe me this, she said, her voice rising to a pitch I had never heard from her before. After everything you put me through growing up poor, being embarrassed by our circumstances, having to work my way through college while my friends' parents paid for everything, you owed me this house. Asterisk, I stared at her in shock. The poverty that had defined our lives, the struggles that I had worked so hard to shield her from, had become weapons in her arsenal of resentment. The sacrifices that Edmund and I had made were not seen as love, but as failures that had somehow damaged her. Asterisk, but I held firm. The house was not just property to Mitt, was the embodiment of everything I had worked for, everything Edmund and Mitt I had built together. It's the only security I had in a world that had shown me how quickly circumstances could change. Asterisk, yesterday was my 67th birthday. Millicent arrived with a chocolate cake from an expensive bakery and a bright smile that should have warned me something was wrong. She had never been one for elaborate gestures, and this cake was clearly expensive, more than I would spend on myself in a month. Asterisk, we sat at my kitchen table. This same table where I had served thousands of meals, where I had helped her with homework, where Edmund and I had shared quiet conversations in the evenings after she had gone to bed. She cut the cake with unusual ceremony, serving me a large slice while chattering about her job, her apartment, her plans for the future. Asterisk, then, as casually as discussing the weather, she said, I found a lovely senior community for you, Mother. They have an opening next month, and I've already put down a deposit. Asterisk, the fork stopped halfway to my mouth. What do you mean? Asterisk, it's time, Mother. If you can't keep rattling around in this big house alone, it's not safe and it's not practical. I've arranged everything. We can get the house on the market immediately, and with the current property values, it should sell quickly. Asterisk, I never agreed to any of this. Asterisk, her smile faltered slightly. You don't need to agree. I'm your daughter, and I'm looking out for your best interests. The senior community is lovely. You'll have meals prepared, activities, people your own age to socialize with. You'll be much happier there. Asterisk, and you'll have my house. Asterisk, the pretense dropped completely. Yes, I'll have the house. It's the only inheritance you have to give me, and I need it now, while I'm young enough to benefit from it. What good does it do anyone sitting here while you gradually decline? Asterisk, I set down my fork and looked at this woman who had once been My sweet baby, my precious child, the center of my universe. This house is my home, Millicent. It's where your father and I built our life together. It's where you grew up. It's all I have. Asterisk, it's just a house, Mother. And frankly, you've had it long enough. Some of us have been waiting our whole lives for our parents to be practical about these things. Asterisk, the callousness in her voice was breathtaking. I stood up slowly, my arthritic knees protesting. I will not sign over my house to you. This is my home, and I will live here as long as I am able. Asterisk, her face transformed completely. The mask of filial concern disappeared, replaced by a fury I had never seen before. You selfish old woman. You've spent your whole life making everything about yourself. Making us all suffer for your bad decisions and poverty, and now you won't even do the one thing that could make it right. Millicent, please. No. She grabbed the cake with both hands. You want to keep everything for yourself? Fine. But don't expect me to pretend this is about love or family or any of that garbage. And then she threw the cake directly at my face. The impact was shocking, not painful, but profoundly humiliating. As the frosting dripped down my cheeks and the cake crumbled to the floor around my feet, I heard her words again. It's already mine anyway. Asterisk, she stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the windows rattled in their frames. I stood alone in my kitchen, covered in birthday cake, surrounded by the remnants of what I had thought was a celebration but had clearly been an ambush. Asterisk. As I cleaned the cake from my face and swept the crumbs from my floor, I realized that I had lost more than my dignity in that moment. I had lost the daughter I thought I knew. The child I had sacrificed everything to raise and educate and launch into the world. Asterisk, the woman who threw that cake at me was a stranger. Someone who saw me not as her mother, but as an obstacle to her inheritance. Someone who believed that my love and sacrifices entitled her to my security and independence. Asterisk, I spent the evening in my garden, among Edmund's roses, thinking about the choices that had brought me to this moment. Had I failed as a mother? Had my struggles somehow twisted Millicent's understanding of love and family? Or had I simply been naive to believe that sacrifice and devotion would create gratitude rather than resentment? Asterisk, the house sits around me. Now, solid and familiar, filled with memories of better times, but also shadowed by yesterday's revelation. I know that Millicent will return, probably with more legal documents, more pressure, more manipulation designed to separate me from the only security I have ever known. Asterisk. But I also know something else now. I know that I am stronger than I thought. That 67 years of surviving and adapting have given me resources I didn't know I possessed. I know that this house represents more than just property, represents my right to make my own choices about my own life. Asterisk. And I know that sometimes, even with our children, love is not enough to overcome the poison of entitlement and greed. Asterisk, the roses Edmund planted still bloom each spring. Testament to the possibility of beauty growing from difficult ground. I tend them still as I tend to the life we built together, refusing to surrender either to someone who sees only their monetary value. Asterisk. Tomorrow I will call my own attorney. Tomorrow I will begin protecting myself from the person I once trusted. Most in the world, tomorrow I will start the difficult process of accepting that the child I raised with such love has become someone I no longer recognize. Asterisk, but tonight, I sit in my kitchen, in my house, surrounded by the life Edmund and I created together. Grateful for the strength to stand up for myself even when it means standing alone. Asterisk, the cake is gone, swept away like so many of the illusions I once held, about family and love and the rewards of sacrifice. But I remain. And this house remains, and sometimes that has to be enough. Asterisk.